Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm David Patton, and joining us now, Michael Reagan, best-selling author, political commentator, and of course, the son of the beloved 40th President, Ronald Reagan. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you, David.
We're hearing a lot now about the rapid decline of the great pastor to presidents, the Reverend Billy Graham. Tell us about your relationship with the great Billy Graham.
My relationship with Billy Graham really started, I was invited by his family to Anaheim back in the 1980s, and Billy Graham was having a crusade there. And my wife and family were, in fact, invited to be there in their box. And I had just accepted Christ literally not too long before that. And I said to Billy Graham's daughter, I said to her at the time, I said, I feel guilty that I accepted Christ a few weeks ago. I wish I would have waited so I could walk forward with all of those people at Anaheim Stadium back there in the 1980s. I've been able to speak with Billy Graham on numerous occasions. In fact, I was asked in 2004 to be his speaker at the crusade he did, the last crusade in Los Angeles, at the Rose Bowl in 2004. And I was quite taken with the fact that I was asked to speak. And I remember asking his organization, well, who else will be speaking that day? And they said, well, it'll be you and Billy Graham. And I thought to myself, wow, me and Billy Graham, we're the only ones speaking that day to 100,000 people. And of course, we've seen each other since. And what's nice about it is the fact that I know that Billy Graham has been praying for me since the first day we met. And I now pray for him every day also.
As do so many millions of others. Did your father ever talk with you about his relationship with Billy Graham, and what role did Graham play in the Reagan presidency?
Well, I think Billy Graham played a huge role, not only in my father's presidency, but in all the presidencies. You understand, if there was one pastor, one minister, one being, human being, that any president, whether it be Nixon, whether it be Carter, whether it be Ford, whether it be Reagan, whether it be Clinton, it didn't matter. If there's one pastor they could go to that was just solid and there for them at the drop of a hat, it was Billy Graham. And my father and Billy Graham had a wonderful, wonderful, relationship over the years. And Billy Graham would go to the White House and converse with my father, and my father converse, in fact, with him. And they made a promise to each other at one time. And the promise was basically this, Billy, if you tell me not how to run the government, I promise not to tell you what to preach on Sunday.
That sounds like a reasonable arrangement. I'm curious whether you see any parallels between the remarkable skill your father had as the great communicator and Reverend Graham's ability to preach the gospel so effectively to millions.
Both of them were God-centered. I mean, it's really simple. Both of them were God-centered. Ronald Reagan was a Sunday school teacher. His mother, my grandmother, was a Sunday school teacher. He was raised on biblical principles. My father, as Billy Graham. Billy Graham taught from the Bible. Ronald Reagan taught from the Bible. If you really think about my father, and I would suggest people watching, just go to YouTube and pull down a Ronald Reagan speech. Ronald Reagan, as my dear friend who passed away in August, Judge Bill Clark, and I said to each other, he actually said to me a few years ago, your father spoke to us in parables. The rest of the world speaks to us in sound bites. Billy Graham speaks to us in parables. Christ spoke to us in parables. Ronald Reagan spoke to us in parables. And I think the world is a better place when we hear parables instead of sound bites.
Are you optimistic or pessimistic that after Graham eventually passes, that there will be ever another Billy Graham?
There'll never be another Ronald Reagan. There'll never be another Billy Graham. There'll never be another George Washington. I think God chooses his people and chooses his time for us. He chose those people to get together in an upper room in Philadelphia back in the 1700s to bang out a constitution. He got together in the 1980s and put together a great group of people: Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, Pope John Paul, Lech Walesa, Václav Havel, Helmut Kohl, and Mikhail Gorbachev to ultimately come to a determination to end the Cold War. I think God chooses his time, chooses his people. There'll be another person, but it won't be another Billy Graham. There'll be another president, but it won't be another Ronald Reagan. But that person will at some point come into our lives, and I hope we embrace him.
And what do you see in terms of Franklin Graham now continuing the legacy of his father? I know you know Franklin well.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're both prodigal sons. What can I tell you? I mean, Billy Graham's son, Franklin, the whole family has done such a wonderful job at carrying the legacy. It is not easy being the child of someone who is so iconic. Franklin Graham has taken it, you know, by the lapels and said, I'm going to be my own person. I'm going to carry out my father's legacy, but as Franklin Graham with my own programs. And I got to tell you, I've got to applaud him because it is very tough. I know, whether it's Patty or Ron or myself or my sister Maureen, who passed in 2001, it's not easy being the child of iconic people. I had Jane Wyman and Ronald Reagan in my family, and I hope that I'm able to carry the legacy of my father half as well as Franklin Graham carries the legacy of his father, and the whole Graham family carry the legacy of Dad and grandfather like they have. They're a wonderful group of people, and I love them all.
Last question regarding that Graham legacy. What do you think the history books will say one day about Billy Graham?
Well, as long as we're writing the history books, I think those history books will uplift Billy Graham to exactly who he was. He was America's minister. He was America's preacher. He was, in my opinion, a living God on earth.
Michael Reagan, sought-after speaker, best-selling author, and the proud defender of his father's conservative values. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on Newsmax TV.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.